Okay, well, welcome everybody to the last round of the Mono Cup. Can you believe it? The last round of competitions already. Where's the season going? I mean, considering we haven't been able to meet up, it's just gone by in a flash. It's crazy. Anyway, so this is the third round of the mono print competition, virtual prints, as we've been doing for the last season and a half. Jane, I think you've judged for us before, haven't you?
Yeah, I did. I think at the beginning of the year of your season.
Yes, so welcome back, and nice to see you again. And we look forward to hearing all your comments on the pictures. I assume you have been able to see them already.
Yeah.
Great. So a very warm welcome to you. So I don't think I've got anything else to say except while we're running the competition, please will you turn off your will you mute yourself and turn off your video so that it doesn't slow things down. So I'm about to do the same thing. See you in the interval.
Okay, that's 51 images.
Okay, thank you, Susan.
Number 1, living in a bubble.
Okay, thank you very much and for inviting me back. And just like to say before I start, if my microphone goes a bit funny, just let me know. And it's a case of unplugging and putting it back in again. And that normally solves it. I apparently sound a bit like a Dalek, so, but hopefully that won't happen. But we've got a good variety of images here tonight, and monochrome, I think, is a fairly sort of specialist subject in terms of getting the right image that actually works with monochrome, because not everything does. I'm starting off with this one. I think it's it really sums up where we are at the moment in lockdown. I think you've got it totally right, living in a bubble. And I like the way that you've actually captured the interior with all the papers out and everything else going on. And you managed to not get yourself in the image either. So that is really clever. Whether or not you've actually manipulated it and put the image on and folded it round the bulb or the bauble, whatever it is later, I don't know, but it doesn't matter, you didn't get yourself in there. Which is a bit of a shame actually, because I think it just needs that human element within there. I think the composition works well, but I think you just want a focal point to rest your eye on, to actually go into the image and just relate to, and I think that's just missing. In terms of the processing, we've got a couple of highlights, obviously the windows at the top coming in, but also on the bauble at the top, just a couple of highlights there that would have been good to just burn down a little bit and just tone down. But yeah, I like it. It's a good idea and it works well in monochrome, but just need that bit of human contact like we all do at the moment in lockdown, I think. So that one's going to be an 8, please.
Fifth Avenue.
Yeah, and it looks an amazing place anywhere in that part of New York. So busy and bustly with all the streets and the buildings and goodness knows what else. But there's so many signs, and instantly our eye goes to the Fifth Avenue, which is what you titled your picture. But from there we go out and we look at the different sort of buildings and the lot of street furniture that's around. I'm just going to put on, if I can, I haven't got, yeah, I can now say, okay. So for example, even just tucked down in this corner here, we've got the Bank of America, and wherever we look, we've got loads of sort of words that instantly we naturally go to and start reading. And it's a shame because it sort of distracts a bit from all the different architecture and the amazing buildings all the way around with all the detail. I find it really cluttered in terms of that. Although I keep coming back to Fifth Avenue, my eye tends to wander. And I really want to sort of, I find it a bit infuriating that I can't get past that Fifth Avenue sign. I want to see the Empire State Building beyond, or is it the Chrysler Building? I always get in a muddle with the two. But I just feel that there's just too much in there. I do like the way that you've handled it in terms of the tones. We've got a good range of tones. I think we could have done with possibly just toning the sky down a little bit around here. It's particularly bright, and I think we could just maybe put a vignette in just to hold the sky in a little bit more. But to me, it's just too cluttered, too much going on in the image. I think this is a case of less is more. So this one's only going to get a 6.5, I'm afraid.
All ship shape.
Yeah, and we've had lots of things that we've got to try and think about during lockdown. We haven't always been able to get out and photograph things, so sometimes we've got to make up things and work from home, and this is what this person's done. Done a bit of origami and created this ship, and I like the little curl of paper beyond, maybe just creating it as if it's a wave sailing away. I do like the way that you presented it within the letterbox format. I think that works well, and I think the shadow works as well in the fact that it adds something else to the image. It creates a 3D image. I think the main difficulty of this one is probably your point of focus is literally this area in the center. Everything else outside that is a little bit on the soft side, which is a shame, because if you're doing it within your front room or your studio or wherever, it's not exactly going to go anywhere. And you've got time to actually get that depth of field that you need, that everything needs to be sharp. But yeah, I do like the tones that you've got in there and the way that you've presented it. That one's going to be a 7, please.
Budapest Parliament Building.
Yeah, it's a spectacular building. I've actually seen quite a few of these images of this building, but none of them were actually presented in black and white or monochrome. Most of them were in colour and some of them were taken at night. And I think this one actually works particularly well in the fact that monochrome has brought out all of the detail, particularly in the shades of the facade of the building, the fact that it's very white. And then you've got the very dark domes and the roofs on it. I think really sort of give you a feeling of the depth and the 3D-ness of the building. It doesn't just look a flat area, which sometimes when you take buildings, they can do. They don't have that three-dimensional. But I think you've actually chosen a good perspective and a good viewpoint to actually take this from. I think you particularly helped with the sky as well. The fact that you've got an interesting sky there also adds something, particularly in monochrome. And the dark cloud in the top right-hand corner over here, I think works really nicely. Again, there's a little bit of highlights around here, which particularly in monochrome is something you always have to be careful of. And you can do a lot more in and burning in and just getting rid of that sort of brightness, because my main image, my main focal point wants to be the building in the centre. So that one's going to be an 8, please.
Auckland Railway Station, New Zealand.
Yeah, and again, another one that works really well in monochrome, because you've got such a range of different tones, from the very bright areas where you're obviously looking out of the building, possibly through glass, whether it's opaque or whether you can see the sky, it doesn't matter. It comes up as a very bright area, but that's fine because I think it's balanced by the dark areas as well. I do like the fact that you have looked up, because so often when we look at architecture, we just go in and we look at it straight on. So well done at looking at a different perspective. I do think you missed a little bit of a trick here though, because I think this is such a strong area within the image. It would have been really good to actually have it coming from a corner and creating a diagonal within your image. I feel at the moment that it's not quite twisted round enough. I feel as if it would have been better to just turn it maybe slightly 45 degrees to get that really strong diagonal going up through the image. But in terms of printing, I think, or processing your image, I think you've got it spot on. I love the range of tones that you've got in there, from your whites all the way through to your dark areas. But I think you just lost a little bit on your composition in terms of impact. So that one's also going to be an 8, please.
Camellia.
Yeah, and flower photography is quite in vogue at the moment. I often see quite a lot of flower photography. And I think it's been raised to a sort of a new level in the way that people are thinking about presenting their flowers and photographing them. And I think this is a case in point. I love the detail. Obviously, it's been taken, well, I say obviously, it looks of it's been taken inside. You've got a background, whether you put that on later, I don't know, but I think it all adds to the image as a whole. I think the only thing that I would have liked is just, this is your main focal point here. And when you look at the range of tones with the image, with monochrome in particular, you want everything through from black to white and all the tones in between. And I feel that you could just lighten that area slightly, just to really make it stand out and make it obvious that that is the focal point. And these other two buds or areas around here are just actually supporting that main thing. So it's almost there. I'm going to hold it back anyway, please.
Glass vase and table.
Yeah, very brave trying to shoot glass, particularly when it's lit inside, because I've tried it and all you get is lots and lots of reflections and highlights and the hot spots and reflections of yourself and goodness knows what else. But well done, you've handled it well in the fact that you've actually managed to get rid of a lot of the highlights, but still retain the detail and the shape of the glass. So well done on lighting it. You have got one particular sort of quite hot spot down here, and your table round here is just starting to disappear, which makes it look sort of quite difficult sometimes. It looks sometimes as if it's floating. Also, we've got a really sort of big area here. I know sometimes you can have your negative space, but I think in this case, it's possibly a little bit too much. But yeah, I think it's a good attempt at a still life. And I do like the way that you've got your key line around the outside. I think you needed that because it's such a dark picture to actually just hold everything in. That's going to be a 7.5. It's almost, keep working on it. There's definitely going to be a good picture there.
3 wine bottles and a glass.
Yeah, in a similar vein, I suppose you can tell actually, although there's very little there in terms of what you can actually see. Our brain is very good at actually filling in gaps, and I suppose particularly when wine and glasses are involved, we're very good at filling in gaps there. But instantly, even though you can't see the whole of the bottle and the whole of the glass, you can actually get a feel of what the image is about. I like, again, the fact that you put a key line around the outside. Just be careful, sometimes you don't particularly want a very bright white one. Sometimes a grey key line actually works better because it doesn't distract so much from the image itself. I do love the way that you've handled each of those bottles though, and the way that you've placed them and made them spaced out evenly, and then just with the wine glass at the end, it really works. I do, looking at it in a little bit more detail, I do feel that your main point of focus is on this one in the centre. And again, for me, there's no reason why you couldn't get the whole lot actually in focus. And to be really picky, there's just a little highlight there that, again, you could just burn down a little touch. It just constantly drags my eye to it on the left-hand side. But we're still going to hold on to that one, please.
Long Melford Water Meadows.
Yeah, landscapes I think are incredibly difficult. Well, I find them incredibly difficult, and I probably quite naffed it as well. But I think you've done a beautiful job on this one, because sometimes landscapes, it's all about the atmosphere and the colour, and they don't always work in monochrome. But I think in this case it does. The fact that you've taken the trees at the time of year where there's no leaves on there, I think the structure of the trees really stand out, where you can see the shape with the branches and everything else, I think works really well. And I don't think it would work as so well in a summer shop with all the leaves on. So I think instantly that works in monochrome. I also like the way that you've actually used the reflection as a lead in to the picture. So landscapes in particular is all about 3D, making something from a flat image into a 3D image. And these reflections in the foreground just lead beautifully into the actual landscape itself. And then on top of that, in the distance, you've just got a recession disappearing off. Now, whether they're hills or clouds, I don't know, but it gives that sort of 3D feel to the image. Again, it's been beautifully presented. I like the key line around the outside, just giving that little white border. I think that lifts it as well. There's not too many tones in this one. It really is quite contrasty, but I think it works. It's almost sort of a high key image. And we're going to hang on to that one as well, please.
Bury St Edmunds.
Yeah, I think when you're taking pictures of street photography, anything like this, where you're taking normal everyday buildings, is actually quite difficult. To get a different viewpoint that actually works and makes it interesting. And I think this works well in the fact that you're looking out from quite a dark area into quite a bright area, and you've got those leading lines all the way down the street. So even though you've got the gate and the steps there, it doesn't worry me, because I think the way that you placed it within the frame doesn't actually stop me from traveling down to this street. I think if you'd been a lower viewpoint and that gate had been higher up, then I think that would have stopped. But as it is, I think it works well. Be careful when you're doing your processing, because we're just starting to get some little artifacts and highlights around the inside of that arch. But well done on getting the exposure on the inside with detail, and also not overexposing the outside as well. So I think it's a good shot of that street scene. In terms of competition, I'm not sure it's necessarily a competition shot, but it's definitely one that you've got to go out and you've got to take. So that one's going to be an 8, please.
Abandoned structure.
Yeah, for some reason, as photographers, we like all these abandoned structures, don't we? We're a very strange lot, I must admit. We go around all these disused buildings and take photographs and then come back and do things with them. And I think this is a case of, yeah, texture and monochrome pretty well goes together, and it makes something a little bit more interesting. I do wonder why you cut off the top of this arch here. I feel as if I'm sort of cramped in, if the whole picture at the top is just sort of squashing me down. I feel as if I want a little bit more space at the top, as if it's something that is important I want to go through, rather than you just chopped it off. And then we got like these little I don't know, little slits through the side. So whether it was a bunker or something like that, I don't know. But you start to get sort of a little bit of a story. I feel as if this is a wonderful background to something else that you can sort of add in, maybe as a composite. I'm not sure it totally stands on its own. Yeah, it's interesting, but again, is it something competitive enough in tonight's category? I don't think it quite works for me, I'm afraid. So that one's going to be a 6.
Brock.
Yeah, evidently been up at the protesters for the Badger Cull, and I think you've captured this person with their poster. You've got a whole sort of idea of what's going on. You've given us, if you like, journalism or street portraiture of what this person is about, and I think that works well. Again, it's very contrasty in terms of black and white. We haven't got many grey tones. It really is sort of very contrasty in just sort of particularly the background, where we have these really sort of bright areas around here, and particularly with this guy here, we tend to look and face or look towards a person when we see them in the picture, and he's just sort of in the wrong place, and the fact that he's impinging over this main character, the main focal points person's area. So I feel as if a little bit of work on this one to just make this person stand out a little bit better. I feel at the moment, because we've got the depth in there of the people in the background and the bright areas, I just feel that it's conflicting with the main focal point of your image, which is this person and their poster. This is what the whole image is about. So I think this is a case of where we could do a little bit more work, what would have been in the darkroom, but in this case is probably in Photoshop or Affinity or whatever your weapon of choice is, to actually just dull that background down a bit so it doesn't compete as much as the main focal point, which is here. So that's going to be a 7.5, please.
Everyone has a camera phone.
Yeah, and everybody's a photographer now as well. And as I said, street photography, I think, is quite difficult, and particularly when you get such a range of people, it's trying to get a focal point to stand out from the background with everything else that's going on is very difficult. And I think that you've achieved it in this case. It's interesting because when I first looked at it, obviously this is the guy with the main focal point. That's where my eye went to. But then as I explored a little bit more around the image, you're actually looking at, there's probably 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 other people in the background there with their camera phones as well. And it really sort of sums up what's going on. You get a real feeling, sort of atmosphere of the hustle and bustle of everybody sort of shouting, you know, and showing their, getting their camera phones out and trying to take pictures of everybody else. Again, it's a shame that we've got this really bright area at the top, this white concrete road or wall or whatever it is, I don't know. But again, it's something that we can just do a little bit of work on, just tone it down a bit to hold the image in, because I think you've got a really interesting capture there. We'll hold on to this one as well, please.
Background attraction.
Yeah, and I bet a lot of us can put our hands up, know a friend. I can hear this girl's laugh, actually. I've got a friend that you can hear her laugh from the other side of the corridor or the room, or even sort of the other side of a town centre, I think, because I can just hear her laughing away. And I think you've captured that absolutely spot on. You get the feeling of joy of this girl as she's just sitting there looking at this guy. And whatever's happened or said, you've really captured that moment. Unfortunately, he's really sort of blurry. I think you can see movement in his hands, and his face and his eyes aren't sharp, and he looks as if he's spotted you. She's totally oblivious to everything else that's going on. So I think you've captured that moment absolutely spot on. Whatever they're sitting in with their 15 and 16, again, our eye instantly goes to text. So it's very difficult to sort of juggle where we're looking at. We want to look at the girl, she's sort of the main focal point, but we do tend to have a wander and look at the numbers as well, because that's what we do. Also, the top right-hand corner is quite bright, and the top left-hand corner are quite bright, so you can dull that down a little bit as well. So it's one that I think you've got to take. It's sort of a bit of social commentary of what's going on, and it does make me laugh, but it's not going to be a winner tonight, I'm afraid. That one's a 7.5, please.
The Chilly Wonder.
Yeah, it's hard to believe, isn't it, that we had all that snow. And I know I've got a friend in the Midlands, and they had snow not long ago, a couple of days ago. I think she woke up and the garden was covered. So it's crazy April, isn't it? And I think I love the way that you've used these leading lines all the way through, and you've got your two people at the end there. And this really is contrasty. It really is black and white. And you get that feeling of the metalwork showing through. And the rest of the area that you can see is just covered with snow, and you get the whiteness of it as well. And I think that really sort of gives you a feeling of, I don't know, the cold and the mood that was there at the time. But yeah, I like the good use of leading lines. I like the way that you've got the two people at the end, and just all the detail and everything in there works really well. That one's going to be an 8.5, please.
The Godhead.
Yeah, I find this one really difficult because I like the way that you've processed it and put it together, but at the same time, the fact that it's an image of a statue, or I don't know, a sculpture of some kind, it's sort of getting on that area of it's somebody else's work, and although you've done something to it, I'm not sure there's enough there to actually make it interesting enough as an image. I understand that you've put the grounding silhouette at the bottom there, but I feel as if I need something else in there. I've got the two elements of this massive great head and the sort of the background of this silhouetted land or landscape, and maybe just sort of few clouds and bits in the background. But I need more really as a story. In terms of photographically, I think you've captured it spot on. All of the detail within the Godhead itself is absolutely spot on. And I think it's definitely a subject for monochrome because of all the textures and light and shade. But put together as an image, I'm not sure it really works for me, I'm afraid. So that one's going to be a 7.
Berries.
Yeah, another still life for indoors, and one that you've actually got to think about. Everybody thinks that if you're working with your whatever subject it is, still life, that it's dead easy to do. You've only got to light it. It's not going to go anywhere. You can take lots of shots, and there you go. It's dead easy. But it never actually works out that way because everything is under your control, and particularly getting the lighting right. And I do like the way that you've got this very gentle light that from there we can actually see a reflection of the vase underneath it as well, because that's important. It gives us a feeling that it's actually grounded, that it's not floating in midair. And I think sometimes if you do very high key work, or even if you do very dark work as well, you can sometimes get the feeling that something is floating. But in this case, you've grounded it out really well. I could probably do with a slightly bigger depth of field, or maybe do a little bit of focus stacking on there, because although some of the berries at the front here are beautifully sharp, we tend to lose a little bit of detail at the back. And it's one of these cases where if you're going to play around with aperture, do it really sort of from one extreme to the other. You could go from 2.8 and just concentrate on maybe just one area that's really sharp and make the rest really blurry, or make the whole lot really sharp all the way through. And I think this one just sort of falls slightly in between the two. But I do like the way that you've got it arranged, and I do like the way that you've lit it, and the little bit of toning that you've done, I think works as well. That one's going to be an 8, please.
Pontoon in the rushes.
Yeah, and I just want a fisherman at the end there. And I know it's always difficult because the number of times you put images in and it's like the judge says, yeah, well, you could have had a person there, or if there's a person there, it's like, well, it would have been better without the person. And I've done that. I had one beautiful landscape. I waited for a person to come in and I thought I'd just nailed it. And then the judge came out and went, yeah, I love the landscape, but why is that person there? I don't like them there. So it's always this 50-50 of, do you have somebody there or not? In some ways, I think you can get away with it on this one, in the fact that you've actually thought about the composition and that you've got this jetty or this pontoon going directly out. It's almost as if you're the person walking down there. And I like the way that you positioned it within the frame, in the fact that we got this gap between the jetty and then we got this little island, and we got another bit of water, and then we got the other land in the distance, and then we got the background with the clouds and the sky and everything else. So it does give us that sort of 3D perspective where we're going on a journey through it. I think if you'd been lower and it had been higher up in the frame, I don't think it would have worked. And yes, I would have wanted somebody else there as a focal point. But at the moment, it gives me a destination to actually move my way through the picture. I do think it works in monochrome. I think the fact that you've got these little reflections and these rushes or grasses down here and the same on this side, I like the way that you've handled that. And I think in monochrome, we can really look at the texture and the detail in there and not be distracted by, I think that could have been quite distracting as well. But that one is going to be a 8.5.
I can't get the car in.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd want to put the car in there either, the way this is looking. It looks as if it's about to fall down. And another case of sort of total disrepair, and as soon as we see it as a photographer, we're in there, aren't we? And again, it works so well in monochrome because you can bring out all the sort of the disrepair and the way it's decaying and all the detail in there. I think that works really well, and any colors or anything would have been distracting, whereas this way we can just look at the texture and the actual chaos that's sort of ensuing within the garage itself. And I like the way that you've included this tree here. I get the feeling that this tree is almost holding it up. I think if that tree wasn't there, it looks as if it's all about to slip off to the right hand side and disappear in a heap. So again, I think it's well handled in monochrome. I like the detail that you've included, and it's been really well processed in the fact that we haven't got areas where it's been over sharpened. It all looks sort of natural. I think sometimes when we see decayed images, people tend to over sharpen them to bring it out even more, and it can just look not quite realistic. But I think in this case, yeah, it gives me a real sort of feeling of that's how it was when we photographed it. Whether it's still there, I don't know. But that's an 8.5, please.
Quiet contemplation.
Yeah, and when I looked at this one, I think it's an interesting one because it's different. You've thought about how you're actually going to produce something and photograph it and present it. And I must admit, I sort of went all the way through sort of loads and loads of different scores when I thought about this. One of the things that really sort of struck me more than anything else was it felt almost as if I was looking at a skeleton. And I don't know whether it's the opaqueness of the glass or anything else, but I feel as if there's like bits missing around here. And I get the feeling of there's like ribs going through here. And whether you did, I don't know, but it doesn't quite feel like a real person as such. And if it was a real person, please forgive me. But it gave me that feeling of it was almost disjointed. It wasn't sort of real. And that's a shame because I like the way that the texture actually works on the image, and it really does sort of make you think. But is there enough? Because I end up with just sort of the two things, the texture and the person, the thing in the background, because I can't sort of connect enough. There's not enough detail there. It doesn't sort of give me that connection that I need to make it interesting enough to stay with it. But yeah, I think it works well in monochrome, and again, I think it's been well processed and well handled. But for me, it's going to be a 7 tonight, please.
Hotel Quebec.
Yeah, and another building, slightly different angle to when you think about the one in Budapest. This tends to be a little bit more flat on, although we do sort of get a structure of the shapes and the little towers and things. I mean, I'd love to stay in one of these rooms up here, I think, on these little roundels there. I think it must get an amazing view. But the fact that you've turned it into monochrome, I think, because if I remember, it's quite a red brick building. And it really sort of stands out. And I think you've really sort of paring it back to monochrome. You're just concentrating on the structure and the shape of the building and just getting rid of any of the colours to actually make me think about what's going on. I do feel as if it's a little bit too light in the fact that I want a few more tones in between. We have got some dark areas just on the side of the sort of shadowy area here, and the cannons were in dark as well. I think it's one of these where you need to just have a tweak around with the different hue and saturations to bring out the different shades of the building itself. I feel as if it's just all blending into the sky. It's a very similar tone of the building to the sky at the top. And I feel as if I want to bring it out. I want the backgrounds and the building itself to be separate, and you can do that by tones. So in the olden days, when you went out with black and white film, you would have put a red filter on to make the blue skies very dark. But you can still do that in your processor of choice. Just look at different shades and the tones and the way that you do the adjustment in monochrome. So I like the fact that you've taken it from that angle. I think it works well, but I think we need to just do a little bit more work on the monochrome side and just have a play around with it more to bring it out from the background. So that one's going to be a 7 as well, please.
Dovercourt Low Lighthouse.
Yeah, and I've seen quite a few images of Dovercourt lighthouses, and I think this sort of extra slow shutter speed, where you're using probably a big filter, a big stopper, long exposure or neutral density filter, I think works well in the fact that it just smooths out the water, so it doesn't matter what it's like, it just gives it this really sort of flat appearance, and you get this really crisp horizon. And I do like the way that the little lighthouse just comes up above that. I also like the way that you've got the groin coming in from this side, and you can just about make out the breaking waves. So it almost leads you up to the lighthouse. And I think the one thing that makes it stand out at that moment is this little one fluffy cloud there. I know there's another little couple of bits around there, but if you like, that gives me the 3 elements. We've got the groin going out to the lighthouse, and then we've just got that little fluffy cloud against the really dark sky that just brings it all together. It's a very simple picture, but I think it's very cleverly put together. So we're going to hold on to that one, please.
Farmyard Friends.
Yeah, and it really made me laugh, this. I mean, I just love the look of that. It's a really sort of scraggy chicken. And the connection between the dog with its paws on the chair and just looking up at this chicken, and whether they were all there at the time or whether you put one in after the other, it doesn't matter. I think it's been very cleverly put together. Whether it's in the studio, well done, because trying to get the two together must have been impossible, but you managed it. And I love the texture and the detail on the dog. I even like the way that his paws are all at a slight squiff, and you can just see his tail. You managed to keep his tail in as well. The fact that you've got sort of very sort of blocky standard chair, I think works, because it gives the connection between the two, but it doesn't distract from the two. And again, beautiful detail in the background. Yeah, we're going to hold that one back, please.
St Andrew's Door.
Yeah, this can be a classic case of what you can do with monochrome. You take something that looks quite ordinary and you can actually take a photograph of it and make it stand out and transform it into something different. I think the one thing that I would say, why have you just chopped the top of the finial off that door? It's got to be part of the image. If you're going to include the door, I don't mind the bottom bit being chopped off, but that little bit off the top is quite frustrating, that you've been so careful about everything else. and you've just missed that bit off the top. I do like the way that you got the two heads there as well. It all adds to the detail, and you start to feel some sort of texture of the door and the shape of the door, and you can almost imagine those big sort of heavy iron bolts, or you know, the steel work, the ironwork that goes onto the door. I think it works really well. You can sort of just feel it in monochrome, which in color it would look nothing at all. But it's all about the detail on this one, that if you're going to include certain things and miss other bits out, then make sure you get everything that you need in your image. That one's going to be a 7, please.
Arctic terns.
Yeah, I think whenever you're sort of doing nature photography and you're converting it to black and white, I think you've got to be really careful what you choose to do. Sometimes it can work and sometimes it can't. I know there's a nature photographer, Tom Way, and he does some amazing black and white images, and really sort of, it makes monochrome work in nature, and I don't think it always does. However, saying that, I think the fact that you got Arctic terns, they're very white birds anyway, just with this black head, I think it actually works as high key. And you've caught that moment where they're just having a bit of a conflab, and with the action and pose of their wings, I think it's spot on. You do have to be careful. I know it's high key, but still be careful of areas that you're burning out. I think you've got beautiful detail underneath and on the wings, but just on the back of this bird, you just lost a bit of detail there. And the other thing is that the eye and everything isn't quite sharp. It's just a little bit on the soft side. And it's incredibly difficult nature photography, I know. And you just captured that moment where you've got the gap between the two beaks and you've got the interaction of the birds. But yeah, it's a really good attempt. So we'll hold on to that one, please.
My splintered gallery.
Yeah, and I think this has been carefully put together. I'm not sure that it's necessarily all 6 blocks there at that time taking through, just simply because the lighting is very different on each one of them. This one down here is actually very bright, and then the ones over the far side are actually quite dark. But if you have put them together, then I think that's more kudos to you for thinking about how you can actually arrange them and the way that you've done them. And it's definitely a different take. It's an abstract take on life, looking through these square blocks. And I think it's been well seen and well thought out. And also, when you get these big walls of blocks, how many do you include? Do you do 3, or do you do 6, or do you do 9? And you decided on 6. And I think that 6 actually balances together really well. And the shapes and everything within there, again, it makes it interesting in terms of monochrome. In terms of texture and shapes. Would colour have been better? I don't know, really. It depends what the colours were. But you've decided to just show this to us in monochrome. So really, you're disregarding the colours and you're just making us think about the shapes. And I think that does work. I think it's something a little bit different. So we're going to hang on to this one as well, please.
Frogs spawning.
Yeah, said nature. I think you've got to be really careful about what you turn into monochrome. And you've got these 3 frogs. Well, luckily getting all 3 of them together, I think, is a good start. These 2 here, beautifully sharp, beautiful detail throughout. And you get that real feeling of they're wet. They are actually sort of in water. I think you're losing a little bit of focus just on this one down here. It's just a little bit on the soft. But one of the things that I think is the downfall really of this image, again, think about the way that you process it, is the bulrushes, or these reeds that you've got here. They're the brightest part of the picture. And I love the angle. I like the way that they're actually angled within the image. I think it separates the 3 frogs really well. But I think it needs to be the other way around. Again, play around with your hue and saturation. I want your frogs to be the brightest area of the image and these to be a duller area, to actually just make them sort of stand out. So at the moment, my emphasis is actually looking at the bright area of the reeds, and the frogs sort of go into the background a little bit, which is a real shame. So I said, I like the way that you got the texture and the shape on there. So I'm not sure this one actually works in monochrome for me. That one's going to be an 8, please.
Podium Castle.
Yeah, and I've seen some really cracking pictures of Bodiam Castle, mostly in colour, I must admit. But you've chosen to give us this one in monochrome, and I think it can work with monochrome if you've got that sort of overpowering sky. And I think you're lucky in this case in that we have got some of these clouds around there. I think the ones that I've seen in monochrome before have had totally sort of bland skies. So I think this does actually help. I think your moment that you photographed it actually does work. So even though it's quite a bright sunny day and you're getting all these shadows down the boardwalk up to the castle, you've actually got those clouds there that actually help and hold it in. And again, the fact that it's winter time, I think, gives these beautiful outlines of these trees, I think just balances it really well. I do wonder though, if you're going for symmetry, why not stand in the middle of the boardwalk so that we've actually got the symmetry of these railings going down? We've got this railing coming out onto the right hand side, and we've got the other railing sort of not going to sort of the same symmetrical shape as the other one. So I think if you're going to give us symmetry, it's got to be symmetry all the way down, and not sort of slightly on the squiff. But I do like the reflections you got in there, and that one is going to be a 7.5, please.
National Lottery.
Yeah, and it made me laugh, this guy sitting there checking his tickets, and he's still got his slippers on, bless him. And yeah, I think again it's one of these street photography. It's a real sort of social documentary of what's going on at the time and the place. And you've got a real sort of feeling with this guy checking through with balaclava on and goodness knows what else. You've got a sort of a real storyline, almost a background to this guy. You can sort of start to think about what he's about. You can't see his eyes at all. You've got no contact with him. He's just totally fixed on his lottery cards, and that's part of the story. Again, street photography, background is so important, and that's why street photography is so difficult, because you're limited. If you can't move the person at all, you're taking what is literally there. However, you can do it in processing. This area at the back is really, really bright. It's the brightest area of the picture, and it's really sort of distracting me from looking at this guy who is the main focal point. And again, little things, there's no reason why you can't just clone that little leaf out that's just looking as if it's sticking out of his shoulder, and just sort of tone it down, a little vignette around the outside, just to give us the main sort of feeling that he's the main focal point, and let us look at that and nothing else. Because again, this wall down the right hand side is very bright and distracted from this guy. So you've got a brilliant character there. Again, a little bit of work, a little bit more processing to just bring out the quality of the picture that you've got there. But that's going to be an 8, please.
The Old Temple.
Yeah, and I love the detail and the quality of this one. You've got detail all the way through of all the different filigree and patterns within the architecture itself, and is really well balanced by this tree. Just a little bit of cloud fluffing away in the left hand side, and you get a real sort of feeling of the place and the time. The light makes it sort of 3D and makes it stand out. Be careful when you're processing. Again, we're just getting little highlights on this side. There's something funny going on there, and we're just getting a little bit of highlights under the inside there, where we've possibly just over sharpened it a little bit on that side. But looking at detail of this, there's beautiful quality within the image. You can see every single little detail within there, and the brightness of the dome at the top leading down, I think, works really well. Again, one that possibly works better in monochrome because it does bring out that detail than it would have done in colour. So that one is going to be an 8.5, please.
The Journey's Over.
Yeah, and this is a real sort of storytelling one. I think it's clever the way that you've used the title. And I think so often people sometimes put titles in sort of flippantly, and it doesn't necessarily add things to the picture, but I think in this case the title just sort of sums up the whole image, and I like the way that you've captured that moment. I'm not too worried that the door looks as if it's sort of been a little bit on the squiff. It's maybe the way that you've just held the lens, you've got your converging verticals, I don't know, but because of the way you've got the boards and the hooks, it does give the feel of a little bit of an old cottagey sort of area, and so that sort of adds to it in a way. And again, at the base here, you've chopped off the bottom of that stand, but that doesn't worry me too much because I think it just balances. We get this lovely L shape of the hat, the coat, and then we've got the trunk. And I think that just works well. It's on the thirds, and I can understand why you've chopped off the bottom bit. I think that actually works as well. Again, it's one of these I think works in monochrome, in colour. It probably wouldn't look very much, but the fact that you've handled it in monochrome, you've got the beautiful shades and textures within there, again works well. So we're going to hang on to this one as well, please.
Getting ready to strike.
Yeah, beautiful portrait of a heron, really close up. You've got lovely feather detail all the way through, and I know it can be quite difficult taking pictures of these birds because they're so bright and white, and then you've got these really sort of dark areas and dark feathers. It can be very easy to actually overexpose the feathers and lose detail in there. But you haven't done that. You've got all of the detail in there. You can even see the little whiskers under his chin, and the eye is absolutely pin sharp. So a really good study of this heron. Again, in terms of background, the fact that he's fishing amongst his reeds, the reeds are always really frustrating because as soon as you turn them into monochrome, you get these very bright areas. And to me, again, that's conflicting with this heron. There's lots of white areas, including the heron himself, that causes distractions. And I think this would probably be one that would be better seen in colour rather in monochrome, because I think it's a cracking image. It doesn't just quite work for me tonight. But that one's still going to be an 8, please.
Tragic end of Ophelia.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting, Ophelia, if you have a look up at the character Ophelia and the artwork of the, I think it's a pre-Raphaelite one. It's a take on that really, and I think that you've captured that moment really of Ophelia in a drowning or drowns, and just with all the flowers and everything else around her. I think you've captured that with the doll. It's been well thought out and well photographed. But the thing about Ophelia is really a real sort of copper hair, and I think it's losing a little bit in that respect. I think this is again one with monochrome doesn't quite work. I think it needs to be color, or at least if it's not strong color, just as a hint of color to actually bring it out, which is a shame because I think you've detail in there, and the way that you photographed it, I think has got incredible detail throughout, and I think you've really sort of got a take on it. You've done something creative and different, but we'll still hold on to that one, please. We'll see it again.
Filigree.
Yeah, when we were talking, or I was talking earlier about the earlier vase with the berries in, I said about how important it is to have a shadow underneath it or some feeling of depth. And I really get the feeling on this one that because it's just totally black in the background all the way around, that I've got no sort of idea of how it's sitting there, whether it's just floating in air, or what, or size or anything. I need that shadow. I need just a little glint of light. Doesn't have to be a lot, but just a little glint of light that I can see, and it just makes your brain think about this is actually a real object, and it's there, it's grounded, it's not floating. Which is a shame because I think the way that you've handled the actual image itself, the flowers, the detail throughout is absolutely spot on. I can see every single little bit of detail from front to back, and it really is spot on. I think it's one that's just a little bit of work on it to bring out that 3D area that is not just sort of stuck on a black background. I think could make it a really good, stunning image. But as it's presented at the moment, that one's going to be a 7.5.
We'll make this the last image before the interval, and this
Okay.
is resistance is futile.
Yeah, somebody watching what Star Trek or The Next Generation with the Borg, and where they say resistance is futile. And I think, yeah, you've got that spot on. The feeling of this head and the lady down the bottom, you get the real sort of feeling that it's overpowering and just, well, what am I doing here? And I think it's been well thought out and well captured. It's creative. I think one of the difficulties is that it's possibly done under quite dark conditions, because there's a little bit sort of camera shake in there. It's not exactly sharp, and particularly on the lady's head down here, it's very bright and very burnt out. So I don't know what was going on there. But I do like the way that you got the detail in the brickwork and you got the shading on the face. I think that works. I think it just let down a little bit by camera technique, possibly. If you burn it out too much, you're never going to get the white areas back in. So sometimes it's better to just sort of maybe take a couple of images and put your exposures together. But yeah, it's well seen, well created, but doesn't quite work for me, I'm afraid. So that one's going to be a 7. Hey, well
Is
done.
that the next one?
It is. You're
Yeah.
safe.
Oh dear. Right. The log walk.
Okay, and yeah, I love the feeling of depth within this one. We got a sort of a real lead in with the logs in the foreground, going up the path, and just got a person creeping in from behind the tree, up through into the buildings at the back. And I think this has been really well handled. You got a whole sort of range of tones in there, and we got a real sort of feeling of 3D within the image. I think works well within monochrome itself. So it's going to be an 8.5, please.
Bark.
Yeah, I think this is one that if you've seen it as a print, I think PDIs and prints, they're not the same. You might get an image that works really well as a PDI and it doesn't work as a print, or vice versa. And I think this is one that if you get it printed on a beautiful bit of sort of textured paper and you can see all the detail in there, I think it would be absolutely stunning. But I don't think it actually comes across, unfortunately, on a PDI. I do love the way that you've got detail in there and you've got created shades and tones within there of all of the texture of the bark of the tree. And it's been well seen and well thought out. But I don't think it really sort of transposes across to PDI, which is a real shame. So that one's going to be a 7, please.
Stuck on the beach.
Yeah, and I think the fact that you've got, again, a really good sky here, I think helps lift this image. I love the way that you've dealt with the machinery and the boat on the back. The detail all the way through and the tones within the image work really well. And again, works well in monochrome. It's one where you're really looking through at the detail that wouldn't normally necessarily be seen in a color image, but in a monochrome, it really brings the detail out. Is there enough there as a competition picture? I'm not sure it necessarily is, but I think the quality and the way that it's actually been presented in monochrome gives it a 7.5, please.
Josie in the window.
Yeah, and I think portrait photography, let me just get my annotate back on and move this around if I can. So I think this has been well handled in the fact that you've got a very bright exterior going through the window, and the whiteness of her dress and the whiteness of the interior of the building. There's lots of sort of areas that you could have easily overexposed and blown out, but I think you've managed to hold it all in really well. I'm not sure that I would have included this white area down here. I think I probably would have cropped this area off, to me, that is a little bit of a distraction. I want dark areas around the outside to hold the image in. And I feel at the moment, I'm just sort of managing to escape out the right hand side, whereas I don't want to. It would have worked because the way that her elbow is works within that part of the frame. And then again, I think that would have moved her sort of slightly more onto the thirds, rather than having a sort of very sort of central and up in the image, in the frame itself. One of the difficulties when you have a pose like this with a model is that you've got the shoulder actually crossing over a chin, which is a shame, but also you get a lot of creases in the side of the neck, which again isn't particularly flattering as such. I do like the way that you've handled the face and the hair detail. I think you've got detail all the way through. But I don't think it quite hangs together. It's not strong enough for me as a portrait. So that one's going to be a 7.5, please.
Pegasus.
Yeah, I love the pose of this horse. The way that you've got it on its hind legs. You feel the real sort of power, and you can see the muscle tone in this horse as well. And the background, I think, complements it. It could have been quite sort of iffy putting the wings on, trying to get them to the right size and shape. I think you've got it absolutely spot on with this. And I like the way that you've actually joined them to the horse. It makes it believable. You feel as if it's actually part of the image and part of the horse, rather than something that you possibly put together. So yes, it is a believable image, and I like the way that the background, you've got detail in the background, it complements the horse. The hay bale, actually, it sort of just balances it out almost. And again, it works really well in monochrome. I think it brings out all of the detail and all of the tone of the horse, not just the tone in the colours or the shades, but also in the muscle tone of the horse. The way that you've got the muscles in the hind legs and in the forelocks, I think really works well. And just the way the mane flicks as well, it gives that feeling of movement. So we'll hang on to that one, please.
X marks the spot.
Yeah, and it's one where it's very selective focus. We're just looking at sort of the main sort of center part of the image to the point where the rest is blurred out, and you just get this feeling of the big X, if you like, as part of the image. Yep, monochrome, I think definitely it works in monochrome. In color wouldn't have been so good, but is there enough of the image to keep my interest? I think if I had some sort of connection to what this actually was in the center, it reminds me of sort of part of I don't know, the garage door or something, and it probably isn't, but it's not enough for me to make out what it actually is. And the fact that you've got X marks the spot, it's a sort of a play on what we can actually see in the image, but it's not enough to hang together as an image. I do like the way that you processed it, and again, I do like the key line round there as well. I don't know whether there's some sort of funny bits going on around here. It sort of seems a little bit disjointed. Whether bits have been cloned in, I don't know. But again, there's too many sort of bits and pieces. I haven't got any area other than this center part to rest my eye on, which is where your point of focus is. But that's not really sort of interesting enough to keep me occupied within the image itself. So that one is going to be a 7, please.
The goat herder and his dog.
Yeah, and aren't they in a perfectly straight line almost right across the horizon there? I love the way that this image actually sort of balances out, in the fact that you've got the goat herder just here, and then you've got your line, and your dog balances it out just on the other side. So I think the position of the two works really well. And the fact that you presented it in this letterbox frame, again, gives you a feeling of sort of the size of the herd. And you really helped out in the fact that all these goats are different shades and tones, and black and white and goodness knows what else. It breaks up the whole image. Also, detail in the clouds in the sky, I think, also works. And your foreground, just with the dog leading up, I think it all hangs together really well. And we'll hang on to that one, please.
Sorry, did that hold?
Okay. Yeah. Dandelion, I must admit, I've been out, I've photographed dandelions. You see them come up in the garden, and they're just fascinating to actually look at and go in detail and get detail of the way that the seed head fits together, and they're just so fine and so incredibly beautifully structured that I think it's something that can work perfectly well in monochrome. It does worry me with this one. I feel as if the image of the dandelion seed head itself is very sort of grey, and I want that to be really sort of either white against the black background so it stands out. I feel at the moment, because it's very sort of grey and it's sort of just shading in, you're losing some of the detail that you can normally get out from there. It does give it a really sort of soft feel, but I feel as if it just needs to stand out, is more impact. I think the fact that you have this really sort of black area and white area, that makes that really stand out more than anything else. So it's the shape that it's withheld in, I think, makes it stand out rather than the actual focal point of the dandelion head itself. So that one's going to be a 7, please.
Trio trees.
Yeah, when I was talking about landscapes and making it into 3D, I think this is something that really lifts one landscape up above from another one. And I love the way that you got detail in the foreground of the hedge here, but then we got a very sort of shallow mid-ground before we hit these trees. I do like the shape of the 3 trees. I think they complement and balance each other within the frame. But I think we're losing a bit of the feeling of it's a 3D image, or at the moment it seems really flat. I can understand why you've left this bit of foreground in down here. That gives us sort of a lead in. But I feel that because we haven't got any gap between this part, it's very small. We haven't got that sort of feeling of 3-dimensional moving through the image. I feel as if it's all sort of just crowded in one on top of the other. I do like the way that you've got detail in the sky, though. I think that works as well. That gives us a little bit more interest within that. But this one's going to be a 7.5, please.
Lightning strike.
Yeah, and this poor old tree looks like it's been really battered by a bit of lightning, with all its branches and limbs sort of on the ground. And again, it's one that I think monochrome, it's an opportunity to bring out the texture and the detail that you'd normally lose in colour. It's right in the centre of the frame. You've chosen to give us just sort of a part of the tree rather than the whole lot. So we're just concentrating on the damage almost that has been done and the limbs on the floor. Is it enough within an image to actually make it of interest or hold my interest? Possibly not. I think it's one of these that it's important to take as a record of the occasion. But unless you're looking at different viewpoints, maybe going in really closely, looking up through the tree, but then I can understand that you wouldn't see necessarily the limbs on the ground. So you're in like a sort of a catch-22 situation. But I think with trees, it's got to be something that's a bit more creative, either a different viewpoint, a different lens, fisheye lens, wide angle lens, I don't know, using converging verticals and tilting your camera up or down, I don't know. I think you need something more than just a straight on shot of what we've got here. So that one's going to be a 6.5.
Sax appeal.
Yeah, and I love the feel of this image, the way that you've captured that moment of this guy playing his saxophone on the underground, whether he's busking or I don't know, but I think the way that you've captured him, absolutely spot on. And I know lighting conditions on, if you're trying to shoot on the tube, are never particularly helpful, but I love the way that you've got the detail and you've got the feeling of this saxophone here. It really sort of shows, I don't know, it's a real metallic feel. You've captured that. I think the way that you've processed it, to me, he's a similar shade to everything else that's going on in the background. And I really want him to stand out. We've got really sort of bright highlights at the top here that again, we can just tone in, we can just shade in, and maybe just lift this guy a little bit more. So he's the lightest part. I know he's got a light t-shirt on, but maybe just dull areas down around there, and just bring him forward in the frame. Because at the moment, I feel as if he's just disappearing into the background a bit. I think you could even possibly just lose a fraction of this side. I find this sort of lady's disjointed head here quite sort of off-putting. And I think just shaving that fraction off there would also get rid of that bright area on the left-hand side that you're just losing out the frame, and then we could just even just dull down the hand as well. So I think this one, it's got so much potential there. I don't think you quite unlocked it in terms of the processing, but I think the way that you've captured it, I think it could be a stunning image. So please go back and rework on it, because I think there's a lot there that you haven't quite unleashed yet. The way it is at the moment, I've lost my point on the score, is 8.5.
The sweeper.
Yeah, and it's a real sort of travel documentary picture, this. You've got a feeling of the surroundings. I love the way that you've included all of those pillars, and you're just making it sort of at a viewpoint, almost a frame to this guy. You've just captured that moment where he's just in the right place within the frame. He's doing his job, he's sweeping away, and it gives you a sort of a feeling of the environment that he's within. It's not something like Epping High Street, it's somewhere foreign, somewhere exotic. And it gives a real sort of feeling of the place and the situation. So I think that's been really well spotted. These can be really difficult to do, because often when you turn up at these places, you're not the only one there. There's probably hundreds of other people milling around as well. But you've given us that feeling that it's just solitude, just him on his own, just sweeping there. And I think that works really well. So we'll hold on to that one, please.
There is light at the top of the stairs.
Yeah, and it's interesting, this one. I think it just shows that sometimes you can make up a very simple image that has some sort of impact. And it's just been well processed and well handled. We've got beautiful sort of detail in all of the black areas of the banisters. We've got detail in the flooring, and that little bright highlight makes it into quite an abstract image. I like the way at some point you'd think almost that you want to crop it across there, but I think you'd lose out if you cropped it there, because I like the detail that you've got at the top. It just finishes it off, and the fact that you can see the stairs at the bottom as well. It's one of these sort of classic ones that most people would just walk past, but the author of this has just spotted it and spent time taking it and then processed it well in monochrome to give us something that's really different and really creative. So we'll hang on to that one, please.
Houses overlooking the water meadows.
Yeah, and it's quite a busy image, this. There's so much going on. We've got so many different houses there, and all of the structure and detail of the trees and goodness knows what else. But I do like, the main thing is the reflection that you've got. I think the reflection you captured really well. I think it's just unfortunate, really, that the houses aren't particularly interesting as such, because there is just so many of them. And I find that although I keep coming back to the reflection, I do wander a lot within the picture. And I think as a view, as a scene of that time, I think it works well, but doesn't necessarily work well as a competition image. I do like the way that you processed it. I think the sepia tone does add to it. And sometimes when you add a bit of sepia, it just bring out a little bit more texture and detail that you wouldn't necessarily just get in just pure black and white, or pure monochrome. So that one is going to be a 7, please.
Whistle and flute.
Yeah, lockdown, I think we've all been trying to find stuff to photograph. I think I've never taken so many pictures of birds out in the garden before in my life. And if you're inside, if the weather hasn't been brilliant, then you're looking around for stuff to find. And I think this one, it sort of works together well. I like the way that you've positioned the two together. I think it does work as sort of an image. You got the feeling that this little statuette is almost playing to the flower, and it's almost cocked over listening to what's going on. So you do get that sort of feeling of connection between the two. So I think it's been well captured, and a good study in something different at the time. That's going to be a 7.5, please.
The last image, forks.
Yeah, and again with these, it's something in terms of structure and shape. I feel as if I can see it grounded. I can see that there's shadows underneath of the forks, and so I know that it's grounded. But I am confused a little bit by the sort of the shadows and things in the background here. I assume that it might be reflections of, maybe you've got it on a perspex surface or a ceramic tile or some kind, and it's just a reflection of maybe the roof or the room that you're in. It makes it feel as if almost the forks are in a box of some kind. But I do like the way that you've captured the detail within the forks. It can be, again, very difficult handling things like reflections. And I like the way that you've got sort of the tones and the detail all the way through. You've got a feeling that they are 3D objects. They're not just sort of flat lit, but you've actually got 3D shape to them. And these ones almost look upside down as if they're turned over, and they're almost foreshortened. So it's an interesting sort of way that they've actually worked together. So again, it's one of these, I think it's got to try it. You've got to try these things out, and it's a chance to sort of stretch your photography. I'm not sure it's necessarily a competition image, but it's definitely well done. 7.5 for that one, please.
I think there was a we should have 14. Is that?
Yeah, I do. I'm sorry, I added one in. Sometimes when I talk through things, I change the marks, but I only did that on one, honest.
Yeah, that's okay.
So you will have, I think, 15.
I think it's 14. I think there was one that had a strange. I pressed the wrong button. So
Okay.
you marked 13 on your sheet, and there was an extra one. So that's 14.
Okay.
Okay. So do you want to go through them one at a time?
Yep.
Yep. Amelia.
Yeah, again, I like the quality of this one. I think it's been well handled. I just want the flower itself just to be that fraction lighter. Monochrome is all about light and shade, and it will just lift it and make it stand out. But this one's going to be a 9.5, please.
3 wine bottles and a glass.
Yeah, again, really different the way that you thought about it. Sometimes less is more, and that's certainly a case with this one. And that one's going to be a 9, please.
Long Melford Water Meadows.
Yeah, again, really good landscape. I like the way that you've converted it to monochrome. I think it works in monochrome, and the reflection gives you that sort of 3D feel walking through it. That one's going to be a 9, please.
Rock. No, that's not right. That's the one that had a funny mark on it. Hang on.
That was a 7.5, that one.
Yeah, it's okay. Everyone has a camera phone.
Yeah, and again, I think street photography is very difficult to do because so much is out of your control. And you've managed to get a good image, and it all works together. So 9.5.
Dovercourt Low Lighthouse.
Yeah, again, another landscape. I just love that little cloud there. Without that little cloud, I don't think it would have been half as good an image. Sometimes, again, it's the little things that just add to it and just make it something that stands out. So it's going to be another 9.5, please.
Farmyard Friends.
Okay, can't say anything about this one. I think it's just spot on. I love the connection between the two, and that's a 10, please.
Arctic terns.
Yeah, again, something that does work, nature photography and monochrome. Just that little burnt out part on the back of the bird, and just it wasn't quite sharp enough, but it was still a stunning capture. So a 9.5, please.
Nice splintered gallery.
Yep, something really different, really creative, thought about what you're handling and how you presented it. So that one's going to be a 9, please.
The journey's over.
Yeah, and one that probably most people would have just walked past and not thought about it. I think this has been cleverly put together and all works and hangs together. So that one's also going to be a 10, please.
The tragic end of Ophelia.
Yeah, I love the detail in this one and the way that you've actually tried to put it together. To me, as say, I just want that little splash of colour. So although the monochrome brings out all the detail, I feel as if it just wants that hint of colour, not full blown saturated, but just a hint to just give it that feel. But it's still been beautifully put together. That's going to be a 9.5, please.
Pegasus.
Yeah, again, can't fault it. I think it's a stunning image of a horse. And just everything just all hangs together, even the way the horse's eye, it's really sort of giving you the evil eye. And yeah, spot on, 10.
The goat herder and his dog.
Yeah, again, travel photography I think is incredibly difficult to do. Lots of us take lots of pictures when we're out traveling, but capturing that one that sort of sums it up, and I think you've done it with this one. The balance of the two and the different goats all together in a line I think works really well. That one's going to be a 9, please.
The sweeper.
Yeah, into a thing of travel photography, as said, very difficult to do, and I think this sort of sums up the occasion. It gives me a feeling of hopefully at some point we can all travel and go to these exotic places again. But that one's going to be a 9.5, please.
There is light at the top of the stairs.
Yeah, something totally creative, almost abstract, and again something we probably would have just walked past. Quite a simple shot, but it's been very well executed with detail. You get a real sort of feeling of the metal in the banisters, and then you've got the light and shade. So that's going to be a 9, please.
Those are your 3 10s.
Oh yeah, really difficult to choose apart, but I think it's going to be Farmyard Friends, please. I just love that connection. They say never work with animals or children, and I just love the connection between the two. I think you just nailed it.
And that is supposed to show the authors. It's not. Yes, I do. There we go.
There we go.
Congratulations to Tori Andrews, who's Farmyard Friends, and also Pegasus is Tori's, and Journey's Over is Dennis McDermott.
Well done.
Very well done.
Well done, Tori and Denny.
Well done,
Lovely
Tori,
image
on both, and
Tori.
Dennis. They're brilliant pictures, all 3 of them. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Well done, Dennis.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you.
Tori, did you put the chicken in afterwards, or was it there?
I couldn't possibly say.
I don't know how you managed to put those wings on, Tori. It's just amazing. They look as if they belong.
Yeah.
It's
No,
just
they're
astonishing.
both composites. Pegasus isn't real, and the chicken was photographed
You do.
somewhere else.
Ah.
Sorry.
It works.
Can
though,
you tell
it
me
just works.
Santa's not real either,
Look at
next, honestly.
Thanks, Jane.
Super. Lovely. Well done.
Would you like to see the
Yeah.
authors of the other holdbacks? If I can do that. Let's go. not right.
It's only, yeah.
That's not right, is it? There's only, it's not enough there.
No, I think you've just put 9. You need 9
And above,
and above, yeah, or whatever the option is.
9 or better. That's more like it. Okay, and then, yes. Oh, it doesn't like me tonight.
I've got a list of the name. Oh no, I haven't actually. Sorry.
Yes, I do want the
Go
author's
back.
names. I did it just now. Yes, that's it.
Hey, well done.
Hey.
Well done.
And congratulations again to Tori in another holdback. That's 3 holdbacks. Lorraine Green, Wine Bottles and Glass. Steve Thompson. Steve's got 2 there. Splintered Gallery and Long Melford Water Meadows. I think Derek's got 2. Everyone has a camera phone. And I think the sweeper was Derek's. Yeah. Dennis, really well done. You got 3 holdbacks.
Oh, well done, Dennis.
Have I missed anybody? Lorraine, you got another one there. Goat herder.
Brian's.
And Brian's.
Rose has got Ophelia. Brian's Lighthouse. There we go.
Yeah, well done, everybody. There's some cracking images
well
there.
done,
Had to be
Dennis.
really mean on some of them to split them apart. But yeah,
Stop sharing.
Yeah. I wouldn't have liked to have judged those, so well done.
Yeah, well done, everybody. Good set of images.
yeah,
Thank you,
absolutely.
Jane.
It's a nice selection, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Very good. Steve, I take it you have something to say. You normally do.
But you normally ask me to.
What?
Well, I've done 3 seasons as program secretary, and I hope you've noticed that I've never before asked any judge to judge us twice in a season. And I make no apologies for asking Jane, because as you recall, she judged for us at the beginning of the season and now very close to the end. It's no coincidence, because I really enjoy her frank and honest approach. I like the encouragement she gives us before she puts on the boxing gloves and marks them. But it's most enjoyable. I took a few things out of today. Interesting, we had David Portwain judge for us in our last competition. I think it's the first time he's ever judged for us, and he frequently referred to one element of the images, as did you, and it was, he called it 3-dimensionality.
All right.
And you kindly made it easy to say by calling it 3D. But it was interesting that both of you set great store by the depths in the images, and I think we'll take that away with us. I think it's very difficult on Zoom now, the lack of a real paper print in your hand, to truly imagine these images as prints, because as you quite rightly said at the beginning, mono photography is a specialist subject, and you have to choose your subject carefully, and it's tempting to have a nice PDI that you once liked and in color, and then click it onto mono and see what you get. And of course, quite rightly, that seldom works. Sometimes they pop and they shouldn't have been color in the first place, but generally, and I thought that birch tree, or that silver birch, was a classic, because it really didn't look anything much as a PDI, but you were absolutely right. As a print, that would have been marvelous. So I think we take that away, that it's a very big ask, I think, to mark these images as if they were prints and not just get lost in marking them as PDIs or whatever. So well done for that. I didn't say, my first point was supposed to be, I love the magic marker. We haven't had a magic marker before.
Haven't you?
No, we've had the little whizzy arrow, but we've never had a magic marker. That was a cracking touch. So I'll give you a 9 for that. Well done. Very good indeed.
You'll have to get Caroline Priest then. She's good with the marker.
She's good. Is she? Caroline Priest, right. I'll try her. But anyway, that was good. So, yes, Jane, I've talked about your background and your website and your club stuff in the past. I don't want to repeat all that. I just want to say, really enjoyed your company, really enjoyed your critiques. I think you found the winners, you found the right ones, did very well with that. I don't think any really great images escaped, and I don't think any duffers got in. I think you got that, as you say, spot on. So I'm going to ask my colleagues to put their hands together and give you a massive round of applause for your second trip to our club virtually this season. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for inviting me, and hopefully we can all actually meet up in person, face to face, at some point in
That'd be
the very
good.
near future. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, well done, Jane. Thank you. Tea and biscuits next.